Before we begin, lock your doors, turn down the lights, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. Welcome to Mordveil. Getting a table at the steakhouse took me 6 months the first time. It is the kind of place where money alone does not grant you entry. You need an invitation and a willingness to wait. Over the last 2 years, I managed to become a regular. I ate there once a month, always at the same corner booth, always ordering the same thing. The establishment was famous for its slow-roasted cut. The menu claimed it was aged for a specific duration, prepared with a proprietary blend of spices, and roasted over a very low flame for an entire day. It melted when you ate it. I arrived for my reservation at 8 in the evening. The maître stood behind his podium, wearing the same tuxedo he always wore. "Good evening," he said, offering a tight, professional smile. "Your table is ready. It is good to see you again." "Thank you," I replied. "It looks busy tonight." "We are at capacity, as always. Please follow me." He led me through the dining room. The lighting was dim, relying mostly on candles on the tables and small, recessed bulbs in the ceiling. The carpet absorbed all sound, making the room feel like a quiet sanctuary, despite the crowd of politicians, local executives, and wealthy socialites. A waiter approached my table exactly 2 minutes after I sat down. He poured water into my glass and handed me the leather-bound menu. "Are we starting with the marrow tonight?" the waiter asked. "No, thank you," I said. "Just the slow-roasted cut tonight. Medium rare." "An excellent choice. I will inform the kitchen." I waited for 40 minutes. I drank my water and watched the other patrons. The atmosphere in the room was always identical. People spoke in hushed tones, leaning over their expensive plates, oblivious to the outside world. When the waiter returned, he set a white ceramic plate in front of me. The meat was dark, resting in a pool of its own juices. The aroma was rich, slightly metallic, and completely unique to this restaurant. "Enjoy your meal," the waiter said before stepping back and fading into the shadows of the room. I picked up my knife and fork. The knife slid through the meat without any resistance. I took the first bite. The flavor was as complex as I remembered. I took a second bite, then a third. On the fourth bite, I brought my teeth down and felt a sudden, jarring shock. A sharp crack echoed in my skull. A spike of pain shot through my lower jaw. I stopped chewing immediately. My eyes watered from the sudden jolt. I raised my napkin to my mouth and spat the contents into the white cloth. I wiped my lips and used my tongue to check my teeth. Nothing was broken, but my gums were throbbing. I looked down at the napkin. Mixed within the chewed fibers of the meat was a small, gray object. It was metallic. I picked it up with my thumb and index finger. It was covered in grease and sauce, but the rigid threads along its cylinder were unmistakable. It was thick, less than an inch long, and perfectly machined. The waiter appeared at my elbow. "Is the temperature to your liking?" I dropped the screw back into the napkin and folded it quickly. I slipped the folded cloth into my jacket pocket. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It is perfect. Actually, could you bring the check, please? I just remembered an early morning appointment. I need to wrap this up." The waiter frowned slightly. "Are you sure? You have barely started your entree." "I am sure, thank you." He nodded and walked away. I sat there, my heart beating faster than normal. Kitchen accidents happen. A piece of a blender, a loose bolt from an oven rack. But the object in my pocket did not feel like restaurant equipment. I paid the bill, left a tip, and walked out into the cold night air. I drove straight home, my jaw still aching. When I got to my house, I went to the kitchen sink. I took the napkin from my pocket and dumped the screw into a small glass bowl. I turned on the hot water, added a drop of dish soap, and scrubbed the small piece of metal with a toothbrush. Once it was clean, I dried it with a paper towel and set it on the counter under the bright overhead light. It was dull gray. The threads were deep and aggressive. The head did not have a slot for a screwdriver. It had a hexagonal indent. I leaned closer. Along the smooth upper band, just below the head, I saw tiny etchings. I went to my desk and dug through the drawer until I found a small magnifying glass I used for reading fine print. I held the lens over the metal object. The etchings formed a sequence of numbers and letters, a serial number. I sat down at my computer, opened a browser, and typed the alphanumeric sequence into the search bar. The first page of results was entirely blank. No matches. I checked the object again, squinting through the magnifying glass. The final letter was an O, not a 0. I corrected the search query and hit enter again. 3 results appeared. They were all links to PDF documents. I clicked the first one. The document loaded. The header displayed the logo of a medical supply manufacturer. The page was a catalog for surgical implants. I scrolled down until I found the matching sequence. The text beside the image read, "Titanium pedicle screw, 6.5 diameter, orthopedic application for spinal fusion procedures." I stopped breathing for a few seconds. I stared at the screen. I looked at the small gray screw on my desk. It was designed to be drilled into human bone. I opened a new tab. I typed in the name of my local area and the words spinal fusion surgery. The results flooded the page, mostly clinic advertisements. I narrowed the search, adding the word news. A local news article appeared at the top of the feed. The headline was dated 3 weeks ago. It detailed the sudden disappearance of a prominent local politician. He had vanished after leaving a fundraiser. His car was found abandoned on the side of the highway. I clicked the article and read through the paragraphs. The text described his background, his recent voting record, and his personal life. Near the bottom, a sentence caught my attention. Sources close to the family noted that he had been recovering well from a recent spinal fusion surgery, which required him to take a leave of absence late last year. I pushed my chair back from the desk. I rubbed my face with my hands. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Perhaps a kitchen worker had a medical device removed and somehow lost it at work. The rational mind finds excuses to avoid terrifying conclusions. I sat in the quiet of my office for a long time, trying to force the pieces into a harmless picture. But the image of the dark, rich meat on the ceramic plate kept flashing in my mind. I could not sleep. By midnight, the silence in my house became unbearable. I needed to know. I refused to call the police over a paranoid theory based on an internet search, but I also could not let it go. I went to my closet and put on dark jeans, a black hooded sweater, and a dark jacket. I grabbed a small flashlight and my car keys. I drove back toward the city center. The streets were mostly empty. The steakhouse was located in a high-end district, but the rear of the building backed into a long, narrow alleyway where the delivery trucks parked. I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. The air was freezing. I pulled the hood over my head and turned down the alley. The pavement was slick with frozen condensation. The smell of rotting garbage and old fryer grease hung in the stagnant air. I found a recessed alcove behind a large dumpster directly across from the restaurant's metal loading dock doors. I crouched down and waited. 1 hour passed, then another. My legs cramped and my fingers went numb. I checked my watch. It was 2 in the morning. Just as I decided to leave, a pair of headlights swept down the alley. An unmarked white van slowly rolled to a stop next to the loading dock. The engine idled quietly. The rear doors of the van swung open. 2 figures stepped out. They were wearing dark winter coats. The metal door of the restaurant opened from the inside. The head chef stepped out onto the dock. He was wearing his white double-breasted coat and checkered pants. He looked up and down the alley, then nodded to the men in the van. The 2 men reached into the back of the van and pulled out a large, dark tarp. It was wrapped tightly and bound with thick plastic straps. They dragged it out onto the pavement. It landed with a dense, fleshy thud. The shape inside the tarp was unmistakable. It was a human form. "Get it inside," the chef said. His voice was low, but the alley acoustics carried the sound perfectly. The others are waiting. The two men hoisted the tarp by the straps and dragged it up the ramp. The chef held the metal door open. As they crossed the threshold, one of the men slipped and the tarp hit the doorframe. "Careful," the chef hissed. "Do not bruise the meat." They hauled the bundle inside. The chef followed them, leaving the metal door propped open with a rubber wedge. He walked a few paces down the hall and disappeared from my line of sight. I stood up. My knees ached. My mind screamed at me to turn around, run to my car, and drive far away. But a cold anger began to replace my fear. I had eaten there. I had consumed whatever they were serving. I stepped out from behind the dumpster. I crossed the alley quickly and quietly. I reached the dock, stepped over the rubber wedge, and slipped inside the hallway. The air inside was warm and smelled intensely of bleach and roasted garlic. I heard the hum of large refrigeration units. At the end of the hall, double doors led into the main kitchen. The doors had small square windows embedded in the wood. I crept down the hall, staying pressed against the wall. Before I reached the double doors, I noticed a slatted wooden door to my left. It was cracked open. I peeked inside. It was a massive dry storage pantry. Sacks of flour, imported rice, and rows of canned goods lined the floor-to-ceiling shelves. The pantry shared a wall with the main kitchen, and a large air return vent, covered by a slatted grate, offered a clear view into the cooking area. I slipped into the pantry and closed the wooden door behind me. I climbed carefully onto a sturdy bottom shelf, positioning my face level with the metal vent. The kitchen was brightly lit with fluorescent tubes. Stainless steel prep tables formed a long island in the center. Above the tables hung rows of gleaming pots, pans, and massive meat hooks. 10 people stood around the center tables. I recognized the head chef, the sous chefs, and several of the waitstaff, including the man who had served my table hours earlier. The dark tarp lay in the middle of the stainless steel surface. "Lock the doors," the chef said. One of the waitstaff walked out of view, and I heard the heavy deadbolt click into place. The staff returned to the center island. They stood in a circle around the tarp. No one moved to grab a knife. No one reached for the plastic straps. Instead, the chef reached up to the collar of his white coat. He unbuttoned it slowly and let it fall to the floor. The rest of the staff followed suit. Coats, aprons, and button-down shirts fell away, leaving them standing bare-chested under the bright lights. Then, the chef reached to the back of his neck. He dug his fingernails into the skin right at the base of his skull. He pulled forward. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. There was a wet, tearing noise. The skin around the chef's neck split open, but there was no blood. He gripped the edges of the split skin and pulled it over his head like a tight rubber mask. The human face stretched and distorted as it came off. Beneath the skin was not human muscle or bone. A creature emerged. Its flesh was a pale, sickly gray. Its skull was elongated, stretching forward into a pronounced, hairless canine snout. Its jaw was lined with jagged, yellowed teeth. The creature continued to peel the human suit down its shoulders, arms, and torso, stepping out of it entirely. Its limbs were too long, folding at unnatural angles. The hands ended in thick, dark claws. The eyes were entirely black, reflecting the fluorescent lights. Around the room, the rest of the staff performed the same gruesome shedding. The wet tearing filled the kitchen as 10 of these gray, elongated entities stood around the steel table. They kicked the discarded human skins into a pile near the ovens. The chef creature reached out with a clawed hand and sliced through the plastic straps binding the tarp. The thick material fell open. The body of a man lay on the table. He was older, with thinning hair. The creatures moved with coordinated, terrifying precision. They approached the table and took their positions, just as line cooks would during a dinner service. One of the creatures began to speak. The sound was guttural, a harsh scraping noise that originated deep within its throat. Yet I could understand the words. It sounded like broken, distorted English. "The marrow is thick in this one," the creature said, dragging a claw down the man's leg. He fed well on his constituents, the chef creature replied. Its snout wrinkled as it spoke, exposing the jagged teeth. "Cut the portions small. The patrons prefer it tender." The creatures grabbed large cleavers and boning knives from the magnetic strips on the walls. They began to dismantle the body. They worked quickly, separating muscle from bone with practiced efficiency. I watched in horror as the meat I had eaten hours ago was prepared right in front of me. "They eat the rot," one of the smaller creatures rasped, tossing a severed limb into a large metal bin. "The elites come to our tables and swallow the corruption. It taints them," the chef creature agreed. It held up a dark slab of muscle, inspecting it under the light. "Every bite they take darkens their souls. They think they consume power, but they consume their own demise, making them ripe," another added, its black eyes fixed on the task. "When their souls are fully black, we harvest them, and the cycle feeds itself." I shifted my weight on the shelf. My knee bumped against a stack of cardboard boxes. The boxes slid backward. I reached out to grab them, but my hand brushed against a large glass jar of dried peppercorns sitting on the adjacent shelf. The jar tipped over the edge. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the glass jar fall through the dark air of the pantry. It hit the tiled floor, The shatter was deafening. In the kitchen, all movement stopped. The chopping ceased. The guttural whispers ended. Through the vent, I saw 10 pairs of solid black eyes turn directly toward the pantry wall. Living meat, Chef Creature snarled. The creatures scrambled over the prep tables. Their long limbs propelled them forward with unnatural speed. I leaped off the shelf. I kicked the pantry door open, but I did not run toward the hallway. The exit was too far, and they were already converging on the kitchen side of the door. I needed a weapon. I burst into the main kitchen just as the first creature rounded the corner. Up close, the smell of them was overwhelming. The creature lunged at me, its jaws snapping open. I dove to the side, rolling across the slick floor. I crashed into a prep station. Above me hung a rack of tools. I reached up and grabbed the first 2 things my hands touched. In my left hand, a heavy, square meat cleaver. In my right hand, a commercial butane blowtorch, the kind used for searing sugar on desserts or finishing steaks. The creature recovered and lunged again, its claws swiping at my face. I swung the cleaver with everything I had. The steel blade buried itself into the creature's gray forearm. Dark, viscous fluid sprayed across the tiles. The creature let out a deafening shriek and staggered backward. The other 9 were pouring around the center island, cutting off my path to the hallway. They hunched low to the ground, their snouts twitching, preparing to swarm me all at once. I backed up until my shoulders hit a massive steel appliance. I glanced down. It was a commercial deep fryer, filled to the brim with gallons of dark, used cooking oil. The heating elements were off, but the grease was thick and entirely exposed. The creatures began to creep forward, spreading out to surround me. The chef creature stood in the center, blood dripping from its chin. "You cannot leave," it rasped. "You carry the taint." I dropped the cleaver. I gripped the edge of the fryer vat with my free hand. It was mounted on casters. I pulled the blowtorch trigger. The blue flame hissed to life, burning violently in the air. "I am not on the menu," I yelled. I kicked the front wheels of the fryer as hard as I could, simultaneously yanking the basin forward. The fryer tipped. Gallons of dark cooking grease surged over the edge, cascading across the floor in a massive wave, splashing directly onto the legs and torsos of the advancing creatures. They slipped and shrieked, clawing at the slick tiles, trying to keep their balance. I aimed the blowtorch at the spreading pool of oil and pulled the trigger fully. The flame met the grease. The reaction was instantaneous. A wall of orange fire erupted, climbing the greasy coats of the creatures. The kitchen turned into an inferno in a fraction of a second. The creatures screamed, a chorus of high-pitched, inhuman wails, as the flames engulfed their gray skin. They thrashed wildly, knocking over tables and sending pots crashing to the floor, spreading the fire further across the room. The heat was agonizing. The flames crawled up the walls, catching the hanging towels and wooden shelves. The path to the back door was temporarily clear. I turned and sprinted down the hallway. Smoke was already billowing along the ceiling. I reached the metal loading dock door, kicked the rubber wedge out of the way, and shoved the heavy door open. I burst out into the freezing alley. The cold air hit my lungs like glass. I did not stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, unlocked the door, and threw myself into the driver's seat. I started the engine and drove out of the district. In my rearview mirror, I saw thick black smoke rising into the night sky. By morning, the local news was reporting on a massive structural fire that had completely destroyed the city's most exclusive dining establishment. The anchor read the report with a solemn tone, stating that a tragic gas leak was to blame. No remains were found in the rubble, which the fire department attributed to the extreme intensity of the blaze. The authorities consider it a closed case, a tragic accident. I know the truth. I know there are no bodies in that ash. The creatures did not burn to ash. They fled into the dark, shedding whatever charred skin remained. I am writing this because I saw an advertisement online this morning. The restaurant group that owned the steakhouse has announced their expansion. They are opening a new, exclusive, reservations-only dining room in the neighboring state next month. They promise the same menu. They promise the same slow-roasted cut. If you get an invitation to an elite restaurant, if the wait list is months long, and if the meat tastes like nothing you have ever had before, decline the reservation. Do not eat there. They are feeding you corruption. They are waiting for your soul to rot. And when you are fully tainted, they will pull you into the back of a white van, and you will become the next course.